going to speak to Chris Lewis now, one of English cricket's brightest stars. In a career that spanned 3 decades, he played more than 80 times for England and had successful spells with Nottinghamshire, Surrey and Leicestershire.
Then things started to go wrong. He went to the ECB with allegations of match fixing, allegations that were never substantiated. As a result, he says he was driven out of the county game and he never played for the national side again.
In 2008, he was arrested at Gatwick Airport and convicted of attempting to smuggle £140,000 worth of cocaine into the UK. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison, and after serving half of that term, he was released in 2015. He's now documented his career, his life, and his fall from grace in an autobiography called Crazy: My Road to Redemption. Chris, thank you very much for being with us.
Afternoon, Sarah. My pleasure.
Really fascinating read of a book. Before we talk about your cricket career and everything that happened subsequently and where you are now, I just wanted to go back to the beginning, really, for you, because you were from Guyana and you moved here when you were 10 years old. And did cricket, Chris, very quickly become a way of becoming part of English life?
Well, for me, cricket was always part of life. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate enough to be born at a time where the West Indies were producing some really great cricketers. You're talking Lance Gibbs, Rowan Kenai, Clive Lloyd. And as a young person in the Caribbean, we looked up to these guys. We all did as young men. And we all dreamt about following these guys one day. Not all of us were going to make it. But eventually my family moved to England. And for me, it made the difference because it meant at a young age I could actually carry on just concentrating and being a kid and playing cricket. You know, so I came with that. But certainly the environment that I came into allowed me to actually carry on and to actually develop my game, where friends back home had a little bit more pressing concerns.
Like what?
Starting to earn money to support families. There were expectations. You lived as part as an extended family, and eventually you couldn't carry on playing cricket. You had to actually do something a bit more productive, because at that time, cricket wasn't really seen as much of a viable option for most people.
Were your parents supportive of you then, right from the get-go?
No, because it was just seen initially as a plaything. Mm-hmm. Nobody thought that you could actually make a living out of cricket. So initially my parents did support me. They bought me the kit that I needed, but they never took it seriously. And for many years after becoming a professional cricketer and even playing for England, my mom would make a face when she introduced me to other members of the community. This is my son, the cricketer, instead of this is my son, the lawyer or the solicitor or the doctor.
The doctor.
Wait a minute, even when you were playing at international level, you didn't make her proud?
No, perhaps it's a Caribbean thing. I made her proud, but I think deep down, a lot of immigrants at the time, they had aspirations for their children. And it always involved something safe, something at the time that had a lot of prestige to it.
Or your dad was a pastor.
That's a good one. That's a very good one, you know. But being a sportsman didn't quite have the same ring. I suppose for a period of time, she could be happy that I was a successful sportsman and there was something to it. But I think even now, if she was to introduce me, she would still cringe that I didn't become a doctor.
So, well, you move here when you're 10 years of age, and one thing you definitely have in common with all the new people at your school, that you have the cricket that can kind of get you past awkward barriers, I guess. Did that help you, sport, settling in?
It helped during the summer. Initially, when I came and I started school, things were a lot different. I hadn't really played football. I hadn't played any other sport apart from cricket as a young boy. Growing up. So I had to try. Wasn't very good to start, so I was the guy who went into goal because I could catch. A bit of diving, and eventually you make new friends, you start to learn about your new environment. But initially coming from South America, it was an eye-opener. Not everybody looked like me, not everybody spoke like me, or even behaved like me. But those are normal challenges when you move to a new place.
What was the ratio, would you say, of immigrants to people born and raised in the UK, of black to white, of Asian to white? What was it? How mixed was it? How diverse?
I think the area that I moved to, which was northwest London, was pretty diverse. There was a mixture of, they seemed to be everybody there, but essentially the values and the teaching were all very English, so there was a lot to learn. But it was a diverse place at that time.
You did a Phil de Freitas at your school, though, doesn't he? You know, a few years above you, went on to play for England as well.
He was, Daffy was 2 years above me at school.
So he put your head down the toilet then? Yeah.
No, he was a good boy. But we were fortunate. We were fortunate at that time because it was the early 80s when I started, and we had 2 teachers at our school, just a normal comprehensive Wilton High, that were so keen on the sports, and they put their life and soul in it. They gave up their Saturdays, they gave up so much extra time to ensure that all the young boys played the sports that they enjoyed. In my case, it was cricket.
Well, you must have had a heck of a school side if you and Phil de Freitas in the same side.
We didn't lose many matches, whether that was football or cricket. We were, at that time, a talented bunch, and Mr. Williams and Mr. Evans made sure that we were ready to go when it was time to play. Some of the people that they would have stewed would have been Luther Blissett, Dave Bessant, and a whole host of other people who came through our school at that time.
So how quickly then did you start to become well known in the school and knowing in yourself that you had what it took to become a top flight cricketer?
Well, I got quite well known quickly, simply because I was the only one taking my cricket bat to school, whether it was summer or winter. I played cricket constantly. Most people took their footballs to school, so it was a bit of an oddity. But really, as regards to being good enough to play first-class cricket, to be a professional, that didn't really happen until I was probably 17 or 18, and I was handed a 2-year contract by Leicester. Until that time, I was dreaming just like everybody else, and actually only playing club cricket, sometimes second teams at Wembley. So for me, there wasn't any expectancy to be a professional cricketer, but I certainly wanted to be. That didn't really happen until Ken Higgs eventually offered me a contract as a young boy.
From Leicestershire?
From Leicestershire, yes.
And then, we should touch on some of the real highlights of your career, and we'll come back and speak about them more at length, the likes of winning the Sunday League with Surrey, you won the Benson and Hedges Cup, you played for England, you opened the bowling in a World Cup final. But as the book goes into, you made some spectacularly bad decisions in your life. When would you say you started making bad decisions?
I would say that I've made bad decisions all my life. I would also say that we all now and then make poor decisions. You just hope that the poor decisions you make, you can come back from. And you also hope it's not so poor that it perhaps leads the family and yourself to a place of destruction, to a place that it's even now hard to come back from. But I think as a young boy growing up, I had a lot of dreams, I had a lot of ambitions. And initially, playing professional sports helped me to fulfill those dreams and ambitions. And I threw myself into a lot of things that I was curious about. With hindsight, if I had the opportunity to do it again, I would make a lot of changes. But having said that, I also think that with some of those mistakes, I got a lot of things out of my system.
Well, the book holds no punches. You start right at your absolute nadir in the book. Chris, how do you go from playing T20 cricket for Surrey in June 2008 to being arrested in December for trying to smuggle cocaine into Britain?
I suppose the T20 of that year was a last effort at something, a last hope. And when that opportunity came along, earlier or late in the previous year, I tried to grab it with both hands.
You were 40 at that stage, is that right?
I was 40 at that point, but I'd hoped that perhaps just running in and bowling 4 overs wouldn't be so demanding on my body. And at the same time, the game had actually changed. I remember running in at the Oval and bowling my first over and hoping that the batsman would just take a look at me, just to figure out what I was doing. But not in T20. I think the first ball disappeared over mid-wicket. I think probably the second ball disappeared over mid-wicket as well. So it was hard coming back in, but more importantly, my body wasn't up to it. And by the end of that game, my comeback was over. And it lasted one T20 game. And it was clear at the end of that game that there was no more cricket. Also, the contract that I had at the time was a pay-as-you-play contract. So essentially meant that there'd be no more money coming in for that summer. And money had been spent trying to get fit, going away, trying to get the right preparation. By the time we got to the end of that year, financially, it was pretty desperate. And it was at that sort of time that I started to think poorly. I started to entertain ideas that I'd never even thought about in my life, which culminated in me going to St. Lucia and trying to import cocaine and being caught in early December.
The first chapter reveals how you're feeling on the plane and then going through customs. You were hugely paranoid. How many times, understandably, did you think about not going through with it?
Unfortunately, by that time, it was simply too late. My bags were already in the hole, and whether I went and picked it up or left it there, it essentially had my name in it. Mm-hmm. So by the time I was on the plane heading back to England, and all that paranoia and everything got to that sort of state, it was too late.
Before that, before you got to the airport, in your head the night before?
I'll speak personally. The whole episode is fearful. You know this is wrong. Should I? Shouldn't I? So many things perhaps goes through your head, but you'd already made that decision. You're already in a place where you're spooked, and the idea is that somehow doing this thing is somehow going to make it better. As it turned out, is in more cases than not, the reality is that you're making such a bad decision that it can only make it worse. But at the time, you don't appreciate that.
And then you get caught. Describe that moment.
It's perhaps like waking up for the first time and becoming very clear in your head for the first time in months. In that moment, everything that's going to follow from this moment becomes apparent. And for the last 2 months or whatever it's been, you didn't really think about it, or you didn't focus about it. It didn't seem so obvious. I suppose the hope is that it's never going to happen, that you're never going to get caught. And in that moment, when you do, all of those things that perhaps that you've kept away come home to start haunting you. About your parents, about your family, about the public, about the decisions you've made, and about the consequences stretching into a distant future, all become so apparent. And it seems like an instant. And all those thoughts, for me, seem to be going around your head at once.
How did you even try and justify your actions to yourself?
There isn't, I haven't really tried to justify it. What I'm saying is that was so poor. No excuses. That was so poor. That was so poor of me. It's more about trying to actually accept it and looking at it myself and going, how did you yourself get into that place? How did you think that that was acceptable to do?
That's what I mean, yeah.
There is no justification, and I'm not trying to give any. In the book, I speak about it because obviously it's a burning topic, but also just to perhaps shed a bit of light on it, to say this was my state, this was how I was thinking, not to make it right, because I'm not trying to make it right. It was a poor decision and will remain a poor decision, but just trying to shed a bit of light to understand that how you can get yourself into a position where, to all intents and purposes, you're not thinking. You're just kind of consumed by some sort of a panic because of your own situation. And then from that place, you make really, really bad choices. And I did.
And you say, Chris, that you were particularly angry with yourself and upset by the fact that you felt that you'd lived up to people's low expectations of you in the first place.
It's still, I wouldn't use the word haunt, but it's still something with me, is that as a person of color, a lot of time and effort is put in to go in, this is wrong, this is unacceptable. The perception that people can generalize over a whole race of people. I've been anti that for all my life. And then to watch myself actually walk head first into one of those sort of stereotypes, black people are all this or that. And to actually walk in straight to it is certainly a pain. I think not just a personal pain that I feel personally, but also in speaking to certain people, people of color, of course, they would have wished that didn't happen, because it just seems to strengthen a minority's view of a whole host of people. And I haven't helped the situation in any shape or form by trying to actually import drugs into the country. That's a pity.
About 10 minutes ago, you said your mum always slightly disapprovingly introduced you as a cricketer. Talk us through your first conversation with her after you've been caught smuggling drugs.
I can't even have that conversation. How, as you point out, how do you go from mom and the whole family wanting you to be a doctor and being a professional sportsman isn't good enough, to becoming somebody who tries to import drugs into the country? I think, fortunate for me, it was a time where my family as a whole, my mom, actually came around me, and there wasn't the amount of judgment that I was expecting. We all knew that what I'd done was wrong. They didn't have to say that, but we all knew, and they didn't condone it. But at the same time, I was very pleased that my family gathered around and just tried to help support me through, at the time, certainly at the beginning, what was a very, very difficult and scary time. Self-inflicted, but they came around and helped a lot.
Joel's just texted us to say Chris Lewis was one of my heroes as a child. Desperately sad to hear of his tribulations. I hope things pick up for him. Prison, 13.5-year sentence. Is that what you expected? How was it getting a 13-year prison sentence?
It was numbing. 13 years, I didn't know how to process 13 years. It just felt like a lifetime. In that moment, initially, it could have been 30 years. It wouldn't really have made a difference. I thought that was it, life over. It seemed so long. I didn't know whether I could survive it, but just the time just seemed so long. I didn't think it would ever end. I remember the feeling. I remember walking over to my brother at the side of the case and just saying, take care of our mom. Although I was worried about the time, I was also worried about the effect it would have on my mom, hearing that I'd actually got 13 years and how she would deal with it. And again, those are some of the challenges I've got to face up to, in that I made choices that put my mom in that position. And certainly at that time when I was given 13 years, of course, I was worried for myself, but also I was worried about my mom, about the effect it would have on her. The idea that her eldest son was actually going to jail. Fortunately, Mom is well, and we've all survived the ordeal.
The first night in prison. Toughest of them all. It's like, I don't wish to be cliched, but it's like, as you say in the book, all you knew about prison was what you'd seen in films, and always they say the first night is the worst, and so it proved to be.
Yeah, there's just no tools. I haven't got any tools for where I am. I could cry like a little boy, but I can't because I'm in jail, and I'm not a little boy. And you try to, as the saying goes, sort of to suck it up. But in that evening, there were just so many things going around my head, various fears about absolutely anything. There wasn't a positive cue at that time to hold on to. Yeah? My mind couldn't come up with a positive thought about that situation. It was, to say pretty bleak, it was pretty emotional. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. And looking into what at that time seemed like just endless darkness.
Were people recognising you? Were you Chris Lewis, the cricketer, in there, or just another prisoner?
No, it was Chris Lewis, the cricketer. It was simply because a lot had been reported. So people would come and knock my door at times and go, "Oh, you're on TV," or "You're in the paper." I wasn't particularly interested because I obviously knew that it wasn't positive news. And I was already in the state and probably didn't want to read anything else or hear anything else. But that was the situation. People were going to be curious. The cricketer who's fallen from grace, and here he was right next door to me. So again, it was just one of those situations. Yes, it's not great, but it's one of those situations you have to get on with eventually, because again, there's nothing that's happening at that time that wasn't self-inflicted. So again, even though you're scared, even though you do feel sorry for yourself a little bit, you understand, I understood that it was nobody else's fault, it was you. So you just had to suck it up and get on with it the best way you could.
How many of your former teammates, England players, came to visit you?
A few did, but for a lot of the guys, it was, again, out of their comfort zone.
Who came?
Devon came.
Devon Malcolm.
Devon Malcolm came, but the experience was a bit shaky for him. Sometimes going into jails and the level of security and the level of intrusion that you have to go through in order to come and visit someone. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, it's unusual. They haven't been in that situation. It's not a pleasant one,
And your family, Chris?
The family kept coming.
Did your mum come?
Yeah, no, she came. She kept supporting. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes we talked. But the family were very important at this time because I was nowhere, just to give a bit of hope and perhaps to look and go, there is hope. Hope that pain you see in your family's face, that eventually one day you'll be able to make it better.
And you're still trying to do that now?
Oh, definitely. It's still the beginning of that. It was 6.5 years of stress, not just for my mom, for my brothers. And I put them through that. And that's poor of me. I'm the eldest, and I'm the one who's supposed to for want of a better phrase, take care of them and show them the way. And in this instance, I'd failed.
And it clearly still makes you very emotional.
Yes, it is, because it's important, and I mucked it up in that instance. So there is a need for me personally to make good, to be that older brother again, to be that older son again.
Chris, we love talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. I know you're going to stay with us for a little while longer. It's much appreciated. You're listening to Chris Lewis on 5 Live. It's just gone 3:30. Chris, thank you again for being with us. And that's pretty much where we'd got to. We'd got to you serving that 6.5 years, as it turned out to be, half of the original 13 years. Describe getting out.
Probably the best analogy. Imagine being a size 10 and for 6.5 years your feet was in a size 5. And then one day, eventually, you take those shoes off. It was just a massive, massive relief that part of the challenge was over. Initially, I didn't think I would get to the end of it, but eventually 6.5 years did go, and it was my time. And the only thing I can say, it's not joy. Some people think, you want to celebrate and you want to go out and you want to do all that sort of thing. For me, it was just a massive relief that was over. And when I went home that morning, it was also a massive relief to look in my family's face and see a level of relief they had, and it was for me, that I wasn't in that place anymore. Again, all very sort of unique experiences, or ones that I hadn't come across before. You're
out, but you are still feeling the consequences. What sort of barriers does being an ex-prisoner put up for you?
Well, there's a barrier of just simply being a convicted criminal. People have views about people who break the law. There's obviously an issue with trust, being a criminal, but I think also being a convicted drug smuggler, for me anyway, has not a great tinge to it. The things that go with that is that for 6.5 years you've been out of the system, so you've got to get back in. So it's a lot of mundane stuff, you might call it, but it's just putting your life back together, putting your paperwork back together. In my case, part of the sentencing meant that my passport was confiscated. What that means in practical terms is that every time you go to do something that takes ID, there's a difficult conversation to be had, because you haven't always got the right ID, so things take longer.
And now, you talked about the racial stereotyping that you felt that you walked straight into as a black man who ended up smuggling drugs and going to prison. Do you still feel like that now? How do you feel about that and your place in the black community, given what you've done?
Well, it's funny, because when I eventually came out of prison and I walked around in northwest London, and I would suggest that these are the people of my community who potentially would be most affected by what I tried to do. The general feeling and the general reception that I got is that we're glad that it's over. Now focus and move on. That was very comforting. Mm-hmm. The stigma, I feel, isn't necessarily a stigma that somebody else puts on me. It's a stigma that I have myself. In a lot of things, it's my appraisal of the situation.
Yeah.
Rather than somebody else's reaction or a whole host of people's reaction who are saying that. So it's something for me to deal with and for me to actually get over. And perhaps a different way of putting it, something for me to make amends for.
Yes. A lot of text coming into the programme. Somebody saying Chris Lewis, so articulate and inspiring to listen to. Most of us are very close to bad and life-changing decisions, but narrowly avoid them. Please wish him the best of luck for his future. Matthew in Essex, just listening to Chris Lewis, contrite and humble. He's done his time, so now it's time to look forward, not backwards. He's got strength of character that will lead him to future success, whatever that might be in. What a man. And Simon in Tring says, very moving story. Admire Chris as a cricketer, and to hear him relating his story is a shocker, but I really hope things turn out okay for you, mate. I really do. And then we do have texts as well, Chris, saying that we shouldn't be interviewing you because you're a convicted criminal, a drug smuggler who's trying to profit from his crimes by writing a book about it. You must experience that kind of reaction frequently.
I understand that there are going to be a whole host of different reactions about what I've done, and perhaps that's to be expected, because what I've done can polarize and does polarize an awful lot of people. So people are, of course, entitled to their opinion. But whether you're a drug smuggler or anybody else, you're a human being at the end of it. And part of getting people to, let's say, walk the right path is the idea that there's some sort of redemption at the end. That actually, that if you pull yourself together, you can actually get on with life. And I think that's an important part. To offer somebody who's broken the law that actually, mate, if you do the right thing, you can still be a part of society and you can still actually earn a living. I think the idea that because you're a criminal or you've broken the law, that you're not allowed to earn money and you're not allowed to be a part of society anymore, personally speaking, I don't see how that actually helps.
Part of you trying to get back into society is by telling others about your story. You've done a lot of work with the Professional Cricketers Association, going round the county grounds. I think we've worked with people like Simon Jones, the former cricketer, doing that as well. What's that experience like, speaking to people at the start of their career?
It brings back a lot of memories, because on the first day, I remembered my first day as a professional cricketer. I remembered many occasions where people came in to talk to me about pensions and about other things. And I remember my thought process at the time. As a young person, I thought, well, pension is for, let's say, people who are older. And even if I needed one, I can get one later. You know, they really weren't talking to me, or I thought they weren't talking to me. You know, so it was interesting being in that position and trying to convince some teenagers, some in their early 20s, that this is the time, the best time to start planning for your future. And that same mindset that they might have right in that moment is the one that I actually had, would actually help to sort of make sure that I didn't do the things that perhaps I should and taken full advantage of the situation. And for them, it's a fantastic opportunity, as it was for me. Mm-hmm. I simply didn't make the most of it. And I was there to tell them and to remind them, as much fun as you're having, and have fun. But this is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity that isn't going to last for a lifetime. And in fact, for some of them, that opportunity might be gone in a couple of years.
Well, it's a very different cricket that they are starting out in now when it comes to the money, Chris. I was shocked when I was reading the book. You're trying to renegotiate your contract with Leicestershire and you're offered £9,000 for a season. What year's that?
That would be late 80s, early 90s.
£9,000? Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I will say this. There wasn't a great deal of money in county cricket at those times. However, as a county cricketer and also, at the time, also an international cricketer, with better choices, the money that we were earning could have made for a comfortable life. So, yes, it's not the same as today, the mega money there is on offer today. But still, at the time, it wasn't so much about the quantity of money available. In my case, it was what I actually did with that money.
What were you wasting it on?
I wouldn't necessarily always choose the word waste. I was buying...
It's the George Best approach.
But I was just enjoying life. As a young man, I dreamt of cars. I dreamt of going out. I dreamt of clothes. I dreamt of all of those things.
You didn't just dream about the cars. You bought a few, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Well, eventually, when there was an opportunity to, and I had that money to do it,
Yeah.
I threw myself into a lot of those things and didn't really give too much care about what was to come. Because, of course, next year I'd still be a cricketer, and the year after that. Yeah. And I'll do it then, you know. And really going around talking to a lot of these professionals was trying to just sort of put up red flags around sort of behaviors like that. And it almost doesn't matter the amount of money you're earning. If you're of that mind, you will find something to do with it. So even though players are earning a lot more money today, I'm sure there are a lot of things that they could spend that awful lot of money on. I hear yachts are all the rage these days.
A far cry from your life currently, indeed. Chris, what is the plan? Because from what you were saying at the beginning, you sound like what you don't want now, while you have written a book about it. And undoubtedly, of course, let's not beat around the bush. You'll hope it does well because you need the money. But what's the plan after that? Because I know that you desperately don't want this to define you.
Well, no. The book isn't a prison book. I think, obviously, people are interested in what happened in prison and also what led me to making the choices that I did. But the whole book talks about a career. And there was a lot of life before going into jail. So I wouldn't say it's a prison book and trying to make money out of a crime. It's about life stories. And what I would hope for the book is that I wouldn't use the word lesson, but it certainly helps people to decide who they're going to be. Yeah. Wrong choices do have consequences. You're not always aware of them. And where sportsmen are concerned, the choices you make in your 20s when you're in your sports will affect you later on in life. You know.
You see it all the time with footballers, don't you?
It's a life story. It's a life story. Perhaps it's where sportsmen are concerned, it sticks out a little bit, but that's true for all of us in life.
And the powers that be, Chris, because we've talked to a lot of former athletes on this programme about the preparation that actually you need to do mentally and financially when you're an elite athlete coming to the end of your career. The powers that be, do they do enough to prepare young athletes and sports people for what may come, i.e. if you don't save now, you won't have any money?
Well, in cricket, this is also pretty common. The PCA in times gone by haven't necessarily had all the facilities, enough money to do the educational part of professional sports in a big way. Mm-hmm. However, over the years, just like the sport itself, the PCA have become a lot better. So there are a lot, in fact, most professional cricketers nowadays are engaged in some sort of learning process, whether it's going to university in the winter, whether it's learning a new trade. And this is all about opening up different avenues and about accepting that professional sports isn't going to last a lifetime and that you've got a plan for your future, but not just in professional sports, in life. So it's more a story for life, that the choices you make in your 20s do come back later on and affects us all. You would hope that the choices aren't as extreme as some of the choices I made, you know?
Yeah.
But the book is really about setting that out so that's obvious to see. But also, during my career, which I'll call colourful, there have been many incidents, whether it's the match-fixing incidents, whether it's Sunstroke, or whether it's,
Okay, the Sunstroke story. You shaved your head in the Caribbean, a man who should know better, perhaps, and got sunstroke. How did that happen?
Naivety. My younger brother Mark and I decided that we were going to shave our heads for charity. But it was October, November. And being the conscientious sportsman that I am, I decided that if I shaved it in London, I would catch the flu or catch the cold. And I didn't want to. You see how it goes?
I'm seeing the thought process.
Right. So the first day I arrived in the Caribbean, I've taken the barnet off. But of course, it had been a while since I'd been to the Caribbean. And even though I lived there before, my bald head had never been exposed. So it was a problem waiting to happen. And as usual with these situations, I kind of walked into it.
How do you look back on your playing career, Chris? Because so often when you're mentioned, people go, oh, what a player he could have been.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I could have been this. I could have scored more runs. I could have taken more wickets. I could have been more of an all-rounder and affected games more. That's one way of looking at it. But if I spoke to the 10-year-old boy who dreamt of being a cricketer, he would go that I've excelled myself, and at the end of it, I have to be happy because all I wanted to do at the beginning was to play first-class cricket. The idea of even playing international cricket and being part of an elite group of guys at the time, which included people like Viv Richards and Michael Holden and all those guys, was unthinkable. But I managed to get there, and I managed to play Test matches and one-day international 80 times for my country.
World Cup final. I get up to watch that in the middle of the night. I remember driving across Glasgow to find one of the few places that had it on in those days. It was 1992. You got a first baller.
Oh, tell me. It's funny at those moments what your mind can come up with. And I remember getting out first ball and just being stuck at the crease for a couple of seconds, not believing that in a World Cup final of all games that I've got out first ball. And then I started to walk back. And for a moment, all I can think about was my family and friends back home who had set the video recorder, set their alarms to get up to watch the game, turning the TV off and going back to bed and not necessarily saying anything too pleasant.
Chris, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'll leave you with this text. Listening to this man today makes me feel that we are all fallible human beings. We should never judge. I feel he has a humanity within and will be able to help others. Good luck to him. He has a lot to teach us all. Chris, thank you very much for being our guest.
My pleasure.
The book
Chris
is
Lewis.
Crazy, My Road to Redemption by Chris Lewis.